governors, deans, and heads of department. I would like to briefly introduce the panelists that are here to speak to us today. Ms. Palesam Qimbi is a manager of Treasury and Financial Control at Unilever, South Africa. Mr. Charles Fall is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Akili Labs. I would also like to acknowledge the following people. Mr. Luyanda Beile, who will be doing our closing remarks. He is the Manager of Alumni Relations and Stakeholder Engagement. And the individual who will be doing our opening remarks for this event is the SRC Vice President, Ms. Tinashe Tlhako. SRC Vice President, the platform is yours to welcome our people. Thank you.
When I think of freedom, I think of a quote by Kofi Annan, which states, "Education is a human right with immense power to transform. On its foundation rests the cornerstones of freedom, democracy, and sustainable human development." Greetings. Greetings, fellow leaders, old Rhodians, and everyone else in attendance. My name is Tinashe Tlhako, the SRC Vice President for 2022. And I would like to welcome you all to the Young Alumni Conversation, which is a Freedom Month special. At Rhodes University, our alumni are our lifeblood, and we owe much of what we are to their continued support and commitment and personal investment in a myriad of initiatives. As we continue to explore innovative ways, of broadening our engagement, we are cognizant that students are one of our key stakeholders here at Rhodes University. This is the reason for the collaboration with the Student Representative Council to showcase the excellent work of our old Rhodians. Apologies. Nice. The SRC represents leaders in an institution where leaders learn. Our role is to cultivate spaces such as these where leaders can engage with one another and be critical and innovative thinkers who contribute to a more excellent pool of knowledge. It is essential to create a working relationship or spaces for current students and alumni to connect with, because that is where we can reconnect with our old classmates and assist each other in sharing job opportunities, mentoring, and connecting to the global world. This platform is RU Alumni Connect. I think one thing we can all agree on is celebrating greatness and the efforts and advances made by Rhodes alumni in creating better opportunities and support for fellow leaders on their journey of being socially aware citizens for the greater good of our nation. At the end of this conversation, I hope you will all have the necessary information to be your most excellent version of a leader and most critically an engaged citizen. Thank you. I will now hand the platform over to the facilitator.
Thank you, and once again, thank you, my Vice President. This conversation reminds me of a quote from an athlete by the name of Michael Phelps. There will be doubters, there will be mistakes, but with hard work, there are no limits. Let's move into the discussion where we'll have 5 different points of discussion, and our 2 panelists will now unpack the different points of discussion. So the first point is starting from scratch. How exactly do we move and develop into our new world? As a graduate, you must be asking yourself tons of questions. So that is our first point of discussion. I will allow, well, the first point out of 5, meaning that there's more to the engaged communication. There's more to becoming a leader, an engaged citizen. So our first point of discussion is starting from scratch. I will allow the panelists to dive into the conversation. Please do not hesitate to ask any questions in the chat box. We are more than welcome to receiving your questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Palesam Qimbi. I'm very honored to be part of this discussion. Thanks, Luyanda and the team for reaching out to me. Whenever we engage on starting from scratch, I think most people expect to hear a very sob story, a story about how you had to overcome every obstacle possible, and the most gory details. Mine is not that. If that's what you're looking to hear, that's not what you're going to hear from me. Mine is more of a story of encountering people who had access to the right platforms, who then enabled me to get to where I am. As you know, I was a student at Rhodes. I did my accounting degree there, and then I progressed to do my postgraduate diploma in enterprise management. Thereafter, I had met a lady when I was in my 4th year who was a director at Unilever, a South African lady, but based in Unilever in India, an IT director. And she encouraged me to apply for the Unilever Future Leaders graduate program. I then decided to apply as one of the opportunities I went for. The other thing on my end is that I was also privileged enough to be a Moshel scholar on the Moshel Scholarship Program. So one of the things that they would do on the program is prep you for interviews, give you CV writing skills, do mock interviews with you whenever you had secured an interview. And we were also privileged enough that back then, the scholarship program had partnered with specific organizations. So you were kind of not guaranteed, but almost guaranteed that you would at least be granted a first interview with certain organizations by virtue of being part of the scholarship program. So through all of that support that I had, I then went and I interviewed for the Unilever Future Leaders program, and I progressed through the number of stages that were there, and made it onto the program. So that's literally my story. I was fortunate enough to not have a long waiting period post having finished my studies. I had secured employment before I even started writing exams. And I'll engage more on what being part of that program meant for me, and how it's essentially served as a springboard for my career to getting me to the point that I'm at. I think I'll pause there for now.
So I think, yeah, what Palesa said as well with me is there's not really a sob story. It's more just as you encounter hurdles, you kind of have to work across them. And like the thing is, like the starting from scratch, nobody ever really sees that. What they see is success, or they see the outcomes of everything that has come before it. So don't be discouraged by seeing successful people or people that have accomplished certain things. The majority have started from scratch. Of course, there's people that have had other beneficial things that have occurred or that have been present from the start that made it easier for them. But yeah, there's always a progression from one side to another. I myself was, of course, also at Rhodes. I was in the Department of Biotechnology, where I worked in Prof. Janice Limson's lab, and she's really a fantastic person and always supported the whole business and science approach that I took to things. And yeah, it was really good to have that kind of postgraduate supervisor that encouraged those kinds of things. I mean, like one of the questions that I've been asked recently was, so like, did I inherit this company from my parents? And of course, the answer there to that question is no. To which people act quite shocked. But I mean, it's a common thing, of course, where people inherit these kinds of things. Especially in my sector, which is clinical diagnostics. It's not exactly every day that people come up and build companies that eventually are able to compete with something akin to Ampath, Lancet, or Pathcare. So these companies are not that common. But yeah, I mean, starting from scratch, it was really taking a multitude of interdisciplinary pieces of information and combining them in order to be resourceful. Where you couldn't find an opportunity, you make an opportunity. I was, of course, fortunate enough to, in the Department of Biotechnology, work on prototypes for diagnostic devices, and subsequently we got some grants from the government via the Technology Innovation Agency. You guys are a little bit more fortunate now. You now have the University Technology Fund, which actually funds technology coming out of the university. One of the things that is really important when starting from scratch, and it really depends on what you're trying to do, is mediocrity will not get anybody anywhere. in these kinds of things. You really have to be outstanding at what you do, and you have to strive to be the best in what you're doing. And that doesn't necessarily refer to academic marks. I was never a person that got 100% for things, but it really means like you have got to find the best solution to what you're doing, especially if you're building your own business. And yeah, I mean, from there, it's really making sure that you identify opportunities along the way and build from there, building alliances with people that are resourceful and that have resources that they can exchange to you and that can work with you and potentially want to help you is also very important. Do not underestimate the benefits of helping one another. And it's also another thing that you need to remember, starting from scratch. Once you get there and you've gotten to a place where you feel you've accomplished something, don't forget about the people that are starting from scratch. Go back and help them, offer to help. And you really have to take that into consideration, because otherwise the people that are then, when you've made it, starting from scratch, they get left with way less and less support. And that's really not what we're aiming to do. And that really talks to a later point of being an engaged citizen. And yeah, I mean, from my side, I think I myself have always been in business. When I was in high school, I started an IT company. I taught myself the basics of networking and programming as a high school kid, ran that, and then studied software development at NMMU. Then kind of got tired of that and thought, how can you help humanity without becoming a doctor? So the obvious question there for me, the answer there for me was from a very famous tech guru called Ray Kurzweil. If you don't know Ray Kurzweil, go look him up. He's one of the founders of Singularity University as well, which is very much an innovation-driven Silicon Valley type thing. And he basically said that the single most powerful thing in the future, according to him, will be biology and computer science combined. And for me, that was biotech. And if you want to do biotech, there's only really one place to go in South Africa, and that's Rhodes. And yeah, I mean, from there on, it was really identifying opportunities, finding the right thing to do, and following through with it. Always follow through and don't get distracted. That is one of the big things starting from scratch, because a lot of things will distract you. And if you get distracted, you won't stay on the right path and you'll lose touch and sight of things. So yeah, I think that's really my response to that one.
Thank you, panelists. There is a question in the chat from Professor Alan Penny. How has it been necessary for you to reinvent yourselves over the course of your career thus far? And what skills were involved in this process? The platform is yours.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I work for an organization that encourages this. Even in the early stages of my career, having been on the graduate program, there would kind of be milestones in the program to say, it's a 3-year graduate program. The premise of the program at that time was that if you're successful throughout the 3 years with the rotations that you would have done, at the end, there is a promise of a promotion to management level. And then there would be milestones leading up to that. And then back then, there was a phrase where they would say, at 18 months in the graduate program, they make an assessment to say, how are you progressing? Are you showing the necessary skills? Are you showing leadership potential? Is this someone worth continuing to invest in intentionally? And they would say, at 18 months, they make a call to say, you're shipping up or you're shipping out. So I always had that pressure initially getting into my career to say, I need to ship up, right? I need to equip myself to level up essentially. I think it has been beneficial for me being part of an organization like Unilever. The level of training that you get, there is intent to say, what does a finance professional in my case and a leader in general require? Courses to equip you on becoming a first-time line manager when I eventually became one. Courses on engaging, I know that's something else that we're going to engage on as we continue, engaging on acknowledging your unconscious biases and leading through those things, leading in the new world, essentially. leading with empathy, taking into account people's well-being, and of course, skills that are required specifically in my profession to say, you need to continue with your studies to get a professional qualification, to equip yourselves to continue to level up. So I guess for me, it's been part of having a structured program through my employer, but also having ambitions for myself to say, where do I see myself in the future and what will it take to get there? So if I need to continue my studies, I will do that. If I need to read certain leadership books, I will do that. If I need to lean on a mentor, if I've identified someone who leads maybe in the way that I would like to lead, or who's got a specific skill in an area that I would like to learn and develop, engaging with that person and continuing to get guidance from them. So I think it's been a number of things for me. On the one end, circumstantial because of the nature of the program that I was on and the nature of the organization, but also self-driven in the sense of where do I see myself in the future and what kind of person would I like to be? So I think that's what has informed my reinvention process, if I can call it that.
Yeah, so I think the word reinvent has different connotations to me. I think augmentation is probably how I'd phrase it, is that constantly especially as a scientist that comes into business, is you really have to augment your capabilities and skills. As scientists, we're trained to think logically, we're trained to analyze things, we get trained in statistics and how to work with numbers, but we don't get trained in finance. So you really have to augment your capabilities in finance, unlike Palesa, who was trained in finance. So she fortunately has those skills, but it's something that you really have to augment where your weaknesses are. And I think reinventing yourself, if you're jumping from career to career, or maybe transitioning from one career type to another, then it's really about reinventing yourself and realigning yourself. Whereas I believe, like for me, it's been very much with augmentation, is identifying my own personal weaknesses and augmenting those weaknesses through either study or mentorship, or alternatively is just reading, like a ton of reading and building up your knowledge on things. You'd be amazed at what you can teach yourself. And don't be afraid to recognize and admit your weaknesses, because if you don't recognize and admit your weaknesses, and it doesn't have to be a negative thing, identifying your weaknesses is a strength building exercise, because you're identifying those weaknesses in order to improve them and augment your capabilities, so that going forward, you're a more complete or functional person within the space you're working in. So for me, a lot of that happened when I was a Mandela Washington Fellow and was over in at University of Iowa in the United States. And yeah, we did a lot of business administration, spoke a lot about strategy and learned about strategy and what kind of strategy American companies used, looked at various approaches and things, things that sometimes they don't really get taught to you. They're the subtext in a textbook. And I mean, as the economist amongst us here knows, there's a lot of these things that you kind of have to read between the lines, and especially when it comes to pushing forward and making sure that, as a person that needs to run a company that's constantly growing, you really have to identify your weaknesses, because if you don't, that weakness will be your downfall. So for me, yeah, augmentation is really the way to go.
Thank you, panelists, for your insightful contributions. We will now be moving to the next point, a very important point, just as every other point, creating a lasting first impression. This takes me back to the quote that says, how you do anything is how you do everything. I will allow Mr. Fall and then Ms. Mcimbi to speak in that order. Thank you.
So I feel like this is also, it's kind of a loaded question for scientists, because, and I keep saying scientists, but I think it's because I've probably got some weird trauma of being a scientist and then moving into the business world or something. But it's one of those things where, as a scientist, you're always expected to be the smartest person in the room. You need to know the things that other people don't know, but that's not the reality, and that's not always what creates a lasting great impression. where you create a good impression on customers and on people. And this is something that we really work on with our customers at Achille, is if you know the answer and you can, on the first meeting, deal with a customer's questions or a person's questions, you deal with them. If you cannot answer them, you clearly say to the person, I do not know this at the moment, but I'll get back to you. And it creates an initial trust between you and that person, because you're not making an assumption on yourself that you know something, and you might actually answer it incorrectly, and this person might then afterwards find out. And in that case, then you've already diminished that trust that you're building with that person from the beginning. So to create a lasting impression, it's really about how you interact. And it really depends on what kind of interaction it is. If it's a professional interaction, of course, dress code is important. As much as a lot of people nowadays like to think dress code is not important, it is important in my opinion. It's still about you have to look professional, and you can look professional. I've got earrings in both my ears, and I still dress professionally. And, like there used to be a time and day when that was not acceptable, but now it is. But you still have to look professional. And once you've ticked that box, then the next box is greetings. Like, greet the people properly and handle them with a due respect. You always give respect and you'll get respect. There's no assumption that respect has to be earned. That is absolute nonsense in my books. Everybody gets respect. And then subsequently, sometimes people will do things that kind of diminish the amount of respect you have for them, but we'll stay away from that topic. That's something completely different. So to create that lasting impression, you want to create trust between yourself and that person initially. You want to determine what kind of level you and that person are at. Like, are you talking on the same level? Is it more technical, less technical? Don't diminish the person by being overly technical, which happens a lot in various things, in finance, in science, in engineering, where if you're too technical in the first interaction, the other person's going to feel like, I don't know what's going on. So I'm kind of now scared or put off by this person. So you really have to learn to read people and build trust from the first interaction. And that is what gets people to come back to you and interact with you again. But yeah, I'll give over to Palesa now. I think she's got probably a better corporate view of this than I do.
Don't diminish your contribution, Charles. Thanks, Charles. I think I'll just start with stating a bit of my background, and you'll get why I want to do that in a minute. So, like I said, I studied at Rhodes. I'm originally from Tata in the Eastern Cape. Growing up, my mother has done various jobs. She works in banking. She's a branch administrator, so professional in her own right. But outside of my engagements with her, I never really encountered anybody in the corporate space or anybody in the kind of spaces that I envisioned myself getting into. And in fact, I didn't even have that vision, right? Because I didn't even think that was a possibility. I just knew I wanted better for myself. So being from that kind of background, then studying at Rhodes and then stepping into a space at Unilever, very competitive program that I entered the organization through. People from across all universities in the country with different backgrounds. You show up and you encounter people who say, oh, I've done lots of internships, maybe in their parents' business or family friends' business, or have had some sort of engagement or insight into the corporate space. So it already impacts how they show up, right? We're speaking about creating a lasting first impression. But what's going on in your head and the background that you bring with you, the experience that you bring with you influences how you show up. So this used to weigh on me quite a lot because I'm entering this space, I'm thinking beyond just being here, wanting to be employed and make something of myself, but I also have that promise to say, I need to prove myself to potentially get into management and then beyond. So I always used to fixate on how am I showing up? How is the next person perceiving me? And I used to struggle a lot. I think it's been a continued journey. I used to struggle a lot, even in terms of how I used to engage people in meetings, feeling awkward, maybe not knowing what to say or not having the courage to open my mouth and share what it is that I have to share. And what I've just learned is that you just need to be your authentic self. I know this sounds cliche, but if you step into spaces trying to play the corporate game, to come across a certain way, it's exhausting to maintain a persona that isn't true to who you are, right? So just choosing to be myself and show up as my best self. My organization speaks quite a bit on that. And my best self is not who the next person is. I may have my set of experiences and the background that's led to me being where I am, but I've been chosen to be in the same spaces as people who've enjoyed different privileges, leading to the point that they're in. So I take courage in that, and I allow that to make me to feel confident to say I'm also worthy of the space, and that influences how I show up. I think particularly in the corporate space, for me, being clear on what I want in my career and having the courage to articulate it to those who are in a position to influence in my favor has also played well in creating an impression and in getting me continued, I guess, access to people who want to invest in my career, who see the vision, who buy into my own vision and want to help me to realize it, essentially. And that's been my journey. Just be your authentic self, treat people with respect, like Charles said. I think it's relevant for everybody who's on the platform who is in the final stages of their studies. I would advise joining a graduate program and something that is structured like that to set you up for your career. But even if you don't, when you join an organization as someone who's straight out of university, you encounter people who've got more experience than you. You encounter people who also have the same career ambitions that you also have. So engaging people appropriately, not coming across arrogant and thinking you've got something better to offer than the next person, encountering people who maybe they've not progressed as much as you have in terms of their studies, but they're in the organization, they're in the same function, doing the same kinds of roles that you're doing, but just acknowledging people as people and treating them with respect and doing your best, literally just putting your head down, being clear on what is a requirement for success and whatever it is that you're working towards and putting in the work to get there. Yeah, I would say those are the things that have been essential in creating the kind of impression I want to create, and maintaining that, because it's just being myself, literally.
Thank you. Participants, please do not hesitate to bring any questions that you have. There is a question in the chat box from Joshua Etzimaje, directed to the panelists. At what point in your academic career did you decide what you wanted to be career-wise? I will let Ms. Mqimbi go first and then Mr. Fall. Thank you.
I think for me, it's evolved. So I'll speak of it in two phases. Like I mentioned, I did an accounting degree. Back when I was 13 years old, I don't know what gave me this conviction because I didn't encounter anybody. I made the decision to say, I want to be an accountant. I didn't know anyone who was an accountant, but that's just the feeling that I had. So I chose studies along those lines for my high school subjects. And then I tried to pursue that path, right? When I actually started my journey, I was set on saying, I want to be a CA, because that's what you expected to do, right? If you're doing an accounting degree. In my final year in matric, I applied for a KPMG bursary. And for those of you who are familiar, if you want to join the CA stream and you're funded by an audit firm, the idea is that you get to work for them, to do your articles with them post-university, and then you pursue your studies, right? You finish your qualification, you become a CA. So I thought that's what I'm going to do. I applied for a KPMG bursary. I was successful. I got on the bursary. But as you know, Rhodes University fees a little bit more than what most bursaries offer, right? So I was still on the, what is it called? I was still on financial aid. I had a loan to supplement the rest of my studies. And then about halfway through my first year, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to join the Moshal Scholarship Program. The premise there, you're just getting funded They do fund specific streams, but you don't have to go work for the organization. So you're free to kind of go for whatever you want. That was around May. In June of my first year, I went for my first round of, vacation work, because that was the other idea, to say every time when it's back, you go and you work for the organization. Already in my first time working for them, I just knew that this is not something that I want to pursue. Maybe that was ill-informed because it was still in the first phases. But I made the decision to say, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And fortunately now, I'm not really bound, because I also have the scholarship program that's funding me. So I started off saying, I'm pursuing this stream specifically to become a CA. But when I went to do vacation work, and I continued, I think for the first 2.5 years of my studies, I just knew that this is not something that I wanted to do. And then I made the decision to then apply for graduate programs outside of the CA stream specific. So that's why I say it's kind of evolved for me. And as I continued through my career, having been on the Unilever Future Leaders program, that's become more defined, to say, ultimately, what am I trying to work towards? And what other post-grad qualifications do I need to get, or experience do I need to get to help me get there? So it's changed for me. I was very clear early into teenagehood. And then as soon as I started doing work that is relevant to that, I realized that I was misinformed, or rather my passions lay elsewhere. So that's been the experience for me.
Yeah, mine is, I think, in the sense that it was kind of like one of those boyhood things, like I want to become a pilot. So all the way as a kid, my main focus was always to become a pilot. So I dreamed of becoming a pilot, joining the Air Force, and at one point was looking at how I can join the United Kingdom Air Force and actually learn how to become a pilot there. And then subsequently go into civil aviation and become an international pilot, most likely end up as a captain. So I really had that planned out. I thought, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. And yeah, like it's something that was very much of interest to me. But then you kind of get to high school, like the end of high school, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that affect it, and that you start thinking, you know what, like I end up in the Air Force, I'm going to get deployed and then go into military conflict. So that's also not exactly something that everybody wants to do. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration, there's other people on the other end of these things you're going to be flying. So kind of scratched that idea at that point. And I was like, you know what, it's not something I want to do or be part of. And then, I decided to try and apply for a variety of things. I thought, you know what, I'm adept at computers, I will go study software development. So halfway through software development at NMMU, or now NMU, I believe. Sorry, I can't remember the names too well. But halfway through that, and it was a BTech, I kind of decided, you know what, this isn't really the thing for me, but I built up a lot of really important, useful skills. So software development, basic components of that, things like database management, and then of course a whole bunch of networking, because I've specialized in networking. So the Cisco courses that I did as well. So it was a lot of useful information, and I utilized it quite often. But then I thought, you know what, for me, really, like I'm looking for something where I can have a bigger impact. And I thought maybe medical would be good. But then I kind of thought, you know what, a medical degree is another 5 years, and you kind of see one patient at a time. Is there not maybe like a way I can go into research and affect something that can help a lot of people at a time? So I thought, you know what, biotech is really good with that. We like biotech, you can work on a variety of things, genetic engineering, you can work on diagnostics, you can work on re-engineering food and plants, which can help a lot of people. So I thought, you know what, let me go do biotech. And when I was doing biotech, I of course thought, you know what, I'm probably going to stay in academia, go on and do my master's and my PhD, I'd still like to apologize to my supervisor, Prof. Janice Limson, for not finishing my master's, but it's not her fault. That would be me. And yeah, I kind of progressed quite naturally there, in the sense that I was very involved with science, and science massively interests me, and it was always useful for me to apply my computer science background and biotech to do weird things and to automate things. So for instance, my master's degree research, I automated a large component of the experiments so that I didn't have to sit in the laboratory for 14 hours a day and actually look at my experiment, which probably also annoyed a lot of people, but you know what it is what it is. But yeah, then that kind of all led into realizing, you know what, I'm quite good at solving problems, and there's a lot of real world problems that we can solve. So myself and my business partner, Lucas, who was also in biotech, and he was in Dr. Ol Prinslow's lab, who also put up with a lot of nonsense from us, and us hogging his 3D printers. Yeah, like they really supported our ideas and everything we did. And then we kind of organically went towards, you know what, like, let's try and make some products. And we ended up working in like developing products and contributing to like research as well. And then organically went into us coming up with this idea, of course, for, sorry, this is taking a little bit longer than expected, but I'll wrap up shortly, is coming up with a pharmaceutical formulation for a drug to essentially augment or support mental function, so, or nootropics. That company kind of grew and fizzled out again. And then subsequently, we kind of focused more on diagnostics, because I come from a diagnostics lab. And yeah, then went into the whole process. So it wasn't really pre-decided to end up in diagnostics. It was really kind of a pathway to diagnostics more than anything else. And yeah, I wouldn't say passion, because I think that word is abused. I would say I've got a insatiable appetite for discovering how we can improve diagnostics. That is really like how I would phrase it.
All right, I have a question from Vuyelwa Moyo to both panelists. I would like to extend it to both panelists, whether you are open to mentorship, whether you're open to being a mentor. I would like to start with Mr. Fall and then Ms. Mqimbi.
Sorry, guys. This is what happens when you work in clinical diagnostics. I just got a message with regards to a patient and stuff. So sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Oh, yes. My question was directed to you, Mr. Fall. Yes. Are you open to being a mentor to any student or young graduate that's set to take on the world? I would also like to extend the question to Ms. Mqimbi. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always open to being a mentor where I can. I'll be quite upfront about where my time limitations are, because I believe it's better to be upfront about that and be like, hey, I actually have time to help you, versus I don't have time and then I just string you along. So I mean, there's a limitation on how many people I can assist, but yeah, I would be open at the moment. I used to be part of the Ellen Gray Orbis Foundation mentorship program, but that's kind of I still have a mentee, but he's kind of doing his own thing. He's very independent there. But yeah, I do have time that I can allocate, probably at most at the moment, to two mentees, where we can have a conversation at given time intervals.
Well put, Charles. I think I'm also open to mentoring anyone who's keen, but we just agree on how frequently we would e-meet, since everything is virtual now, and the frequency of the engagements, but definitely open to someone who wants to pursue the same path or just wanting general career advice in whatever way I can help. I'm open.
All right. Just one question directed to Ms. Mqimbi. What has been the biggest biggest barrier in your journey to success?
I think I have already touched on it, and I see there is a question linked to that. I always speak on how it's taken me a long time to essentially find my voice, both in the literal sense and just saying like, what contribution do I want to make in the corporate space? I don't come across that way. Like when I do engage people, I don't come across like I'm not confident or I'm nervous. So people have not really seen it unless I've been vulnerable enough to say, hey, this is the space that I'm needing help in. So for me, it's just believing in self and knowing that I'm capable, I'm here for a reason, I've got something special to contribute. Yeah, and then also not being afraid to say, these are the areas where I fall short, and I either need to upskill myself through reading up on that subject or getting the actual experience, if it's a specific skill set or an area in the business that doesn't make me too comfortable, just putting my hand up to say, that's the space that I'd like to move in, because ultimately I'll learn by doing, and of course through mentorship and being coached by people with the relevant experience or who've gone through the same kind of journey that I am positioning myself for. So that's literally been that, to say, just be confident, you know, take up space, so to speak, both mentally before you physically show up, and then physically once you're there. I think that's been the thing for me.
The next point of discussion that we'll be moving to is the importance of transformation and diversity in the workplace. I will give the platform to Ms. Mcimbi and then Mr. Fall.
Cool. So, I mean, with South Africa's history, we know the story, right? So I'll just speak on the journey that the organization I work for has taken and how I've tried to play a small part in that as well. I think before, I think it was July 2020, in South Africa specifically, there was an acknowledgement to say we need to be inclusive, we need to be racially diverse in the spaces that I'm in. So Unilever is in the FMCG space. We do consumer goods, and most of you would be familiar with the brands that the company sells. But I think the feedback applies in any corporate space in South Africa. And in the rest of the world. So it's important that there's diversity of thought, but also representation of people from all groups, because it impacts how we show up and the work that we do. In one of the roles that I did previously, I was a commercial finance manager for what we refer to as traditional trade. That's like general trade, wholesalers, cash and carries, those kinds of customer groupings. And one of the things that fell into this space was route to market. And one of the things that we were working on there was a spaza project. So the company trying to sell direct to spaza stores and to reach informal trade, essentially. When the program first started, before my time, the idea was that we're going to be selling specific packs in that market and trying to get insights from consumers and having our own model to get there. One of the packs that I'll make an example of that was on the list of packs that they wanted to sell in that space was Omo 2 kg. If you've lived in a township or you've shopped at a spaza, you know that nobody would go and buy a 2 kg washing powder at a spaza shop. There's very specific things that you go there for. But unless there's diversity of thought in terms of the group that is put together as the project team and the people who are from different backgrounds, nobody stops to say, hey guys, the model looks great, the idea looks great, but practically this thing doesn't work. People in townships are not going to go buy, you're not going to go buy a skip. There wasn't skip on the list of packs, but I'm just using that as an example to say, if you have an understanding because of your background, you're able to contribute more than just saying, I'm the finance person, I'm doing the numbers, but over and above that, that's how life in that part of the world works. Therefore, the ideas that we're putting on the table are not going to work. So I think that's a nice example to showcase the importance of having, of being transformed and having representation, I guess, in that space. So that's one of the things that the business was working on. And then before July 2020, it was always a focus to say, we need to have women represented at all leadership levels. We need to have Black people specifically represented at leadership levels, but there was never an intent behind the way organizations engage in that space and how they try to work towards those targets essentially. And then Black Lives Matter happened, George Floyd happened. And then globally, it was a key focus to say, let's take a look, what are organizations really doing to essentially make sure that Black people are also represented at all leadership levels, and people are being given the same kind of chances at success and being groomed to get the same kind of opportunities that they've previously not enjoyed in the past. So that's the journey that the organization has taken. And then there started to be an intent behind recruitment strategies. What are the targets that we're working towards from a representation point of view? How are we breaking down, ensuring that everybody's given the same fighting chances? And one of the things that had occurred in the specific organization that I work for is having groups or committees around equity, diversity, and inclusivity, for which I am part of. To say, how do we contribute in our specific function towards giving people the necessary skills to level up and be given a fighting chance at getting to management one day. So it's important in terms of the offering that we give, in terms of how we engage customers, but equally in the work environment. If I see someone who looks like me at the top, it influences my decision to continue to be in the organization or that specific space, to say there's intent behind my own career, even though that person's journey is different, to say I could make it there if I've got the right skills and I've got the right level of experiences. And it looks like I will be getting those opportunities because policies are geared towards giving me and someone like me a fair chance. So those are my thoughts around transformation and diversity in the workplace.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. I think it's a very interesting view. And then coming to me, of course, a white male, which, yeah, it's a question that I think especially white males in my position, where we've built companies or like we're CEO, we really have to take seriously. Because historically, I mean, we all know South Africa's history. There's a sense of responsibility there to make sure that, yeah, sure, we're now in a position of power, younger generation, let's make sure we give equal opportunities to everybody that comes across and wants to work with us, and that there is an opportunity for them. So I mean, we really try to create these opportunities through a variety of routes in Akili. One of them is definitely internships, where we've got 2 facilities, one in Cape Town, one in Johannesburg. And at the moment, we're working to structure internships in order to advance scientists and, of course, a diverse collection of scientists and train them up in our labs, where we do very advanced next generation style diagnostics, especially on the sequencing side of things. So to upskill people there. So I think for us, it's very much about upskilling people and actually giving everybody the same base to start from within the company. So everybody gets upskilled, and then it's really, like I said previously, a meritocracy within our company. So it's very much about like what you have learned here is applicable here, and you can compete with each other, not in an unhealthy manner. We don't, the weird thing is, of course, with our company is we don't really have a hierarchy. So we have our C-level executives, but the hierarchy, there's not really like, oh, I specifically work for this person. So it's a little bit different, I think, to major corporates, but it's probably the size of the company that also contributes towards that. But yeah, we really try to create a fair platform for everybody to come into, to get upskilled and to work in. And one of the things that we really value in Akili is that everybody has an opinion. It doesn't matter if you're a senior scientist or if you're a junior lab technician. Everybody's opinion matters. So we'll look at the opinion and see how it's applicable, and then if it's applicable, we'll enact actions as due to that opinion. So yeah, it's something that we try and always keep across the company, is that everybody's open to their opinion and everybody gets upskilled. If you're lacking in a specific thing or you want to be upskilled in a specific thing, we really try and bring in people there one of the focuses at the moment for us is also young Black female scientists as well, is to bring in more interns and upskill them specifically on NGS, as we've seen that there's kind of a lack in upskilling in that specific field amongst universities, and that's because it's an extremely expensive platform to run and to upskill people on. So it's not very common that you get an opportunity to get upskilled on it at universities even. So we're really trying to bring people in, and we're looking to work with a variety of institutes. I can't say their names, of course, but a variety of research institutes and clinical institutions in order to upskill these people in these kinds of things. Beyond that, for us, one of the key things on diversity is, of course, this might be a little bit obscure to quite a few people, is pharmacogenomics, which is where we look at the applicability and drug dosages and usability amongst African populations. And what we're really aiming to do there is to diversify the knowledge in genomics for drug development. And we'd like to do that as part of a diverse company, so that we kind of have this loop where we upskilling people in order to empower them to know more about African genomics, and then subsequently get drugs into the continent that can actually work really well for African populations. One of the examples, if there's any pharmacists here, is of course breast cancer drugs, which in African populations aren't as effective as European populations. And we really need to unlock the diversity of genomics and the diversity of people in order to combine those two and end up with solutions to these problems. So yeah, I mean, we're always also open to suggestions from that side, and how we can work with entities and with people in order to advance that. And yeah, we also previously have donated some equipment to Rhodes University in order to ensure that people that are getting trained at Rhodes have access to the right equipment. I mean, it's not a massive contribution in like corporate scale, but yeah, we always try and provide where we can, so that we can upskill people and bring them to the level that is required to work in this industry. It's unfortunately a very high, well, I mean, Palesa, your industry as well, with finance, you have to have like a minimum skill level to even get into the industry. And that's really what we want to advance, is ensure that we have that minimum skill level for everybody that wants to come into the industry. But yeah, it's something that we all need to work towards and contribute to.
I have a question in the chat directed to both panelists. Did being a Rhodes, this is from one of our panelists, Ms. Tina Shehlako, did being a Rhodes University graduate put you at an advantage in any way? I'll give the platform to Mr. Fall, then Ms. Ngimbi.
I think that's a difficult question to answer, in the sense that I feel like being a science graduate or postgraduate student at Rhodes is really advantageous. The reason I say that is because I can't speak for the other departments. I was never in those departments. From my perspective as a scientist trained at Rhodes, I would definitely say that Rhodes was advantageous in the sense that when other universities were trained in theory, how to do experiments, we were trained how to do the actual experiments. There's been numerous occasions where we have spoken to other people from other universities that studied at the same time as us. And we were like, yes, so we got trained in this experiment, we did this thing in undergrad and so on and so on. They're like, yes, but we learned that on paper. And, you know, like in the science faculty, physically doing something puts you at a great advantage compared to other universities. So I would definitely say in the science faculty, Rhodes surpasses pretty much every other university I know of in South Africa, in the sense that you really engage with the science and you do the actual things. I know some of the other universities also do a lot of practicals, but I think Rhodes really excels at that side of science and in the science faculty. And like I said, Palesa, you'll be able to talk to the other, like some of the other departments, but yeah, the science faculty, I would definitely say it was advantageous being at Rhodes for that reason. And beyond that is the openness to engage and the openness to choose things to investigate as a postgraduate. Whereas perhaps at other institutions, you may be guided more specifically towards a single field. Whereas at Rhodes, you get an opportunity to be like, you know what, in postgraduate, in the science, let's say a master's in biotech, you could choose to do a huge variety of different studies. And there are skills to support those things. Whereas at another institution, your supervisor might say, you know what, this is the field of investigation that we're going to go down, and this is what you should focus on. So yeah, to summarize it, I would say definitely Rhodes was advantageous in that way.
Thanks, Charles. I think I'll speak more on the softer side, in the sense that we know Rhodes to be the university where leaders learn. Organizations are trying to assess, are you able to go far in your career? Do you have leadership potential? Are you somebody we can invest in? I think there's a lot of opportunities on campus, and most people that I know are involved in more than one thing outside of their degree. You're leading in a committee, in a society that you're part of. Those things help you, even when you're doing interviews and applying for graduate programs or any employment opportunities when you're coming out of university, to say, I was able to do something more than just show up for lectures. I am multifaceted. I've got other skill sets that can be useful in the employment space. So being involved in societies, even outside of being involved in a leadership capacity, to be honest, and the many opportunities, even in terms of paying it forward, which I know we'll speak on a little bit later in the conversation. That's the general direction that corporates are going in, and having had experience in those spaces definitely helps. And I'll also share a story in terms of how I ended up where I am. The person who told me to apply for the graduate program was actually visiting their daughter, and we were on the, I forgot what it's called, the community engagement program where they go to JJH. If someone recalls what it's called, I think it's in Alexandra, an orphanage in Alexandra. So we used to volunteer there on Thursdays and go tutor the kids, clean up the place and fix things up. And she was visiting her daughter and coming with us on that trip. And then she just started engaging me to say, what are your aspirations? What have you studied? What are you looking to do? And then she was like, I think you'd be a good fit for this graduate program. And I applied, and here I am. So I think that was a lucky incident in terms of the network I established, but I just use that as an example to say being involved outside of the studies gave me platform or access to people who then enabled me to be where I am. So definitely, I would say there is an advantage. But like I said, when you're doing applications for employment opportunities, you're competing with more than just the Rhodes pool. Each university does have something unique to offer. So just do your best, excel at your studies, and show what you can offer even outside of your studies. And that is what will put you at an advantage.
All right. We will now be moving to the point of, we had to have 5 points, but the fourth point, which was on mentorship, has been touched on quite extensively. So we'll be moving to the last point of the discussion, which is the importance of an engaged citizen and paying it forward. I'll give the platform to Ms. Mqimbi and then Mr. Fall. Thank you.
Cool. So on paying it forward, firstly, being part of Rhodes, I think I've also touched on how that's kind of in a selfish way helped me in terms of getting a network, which then helped me to get to where I am. But beyond having been at school and being part of some of the community engagement initiatives, even the scholarship program that I was part of, the whole premise is that you don't pay them back, you pay it forward. So you do something to uplift the next person, to give them access to a network, to encourage the next person. It doesn't have to be like a major thing, but as long as you help the next person, you're essentially paying it forward. In my personal capacity, I am co-founder and deputy chair of a nonprofit organization, which is called Sinawe Foundation. And Sinawe means we are with you. and we support women survivors of abuse, and we try to create awareness programs to educate people on abuse and the nuances in that space. So that's what we try to do, but more than just engaging on issues related to abuse, we just try to use the space as a platform to uplift women. And that is, if you know me personally, you know that that's what I stand for, right? Hence, I'm part of this organization. Outside of that specific organization, I am also mentoring both at work and outside of work, other young women or similar aged women as myself, who are in the spaces that I'm in, or who are also looking to pursue a career, not necessarily in finance or in the traditional type of corporate that I followed, but just to encourage the next person, to give them advice. If there's anything that has been helpful in my own journey, trying to do that for the next person, to enable them to also better themselves and basically come to a self-actualization. So those are the things that I do, which I think are quite key. Like I shared, I don't have an extremely sob story to say. There would be nights where I would go to bed without food or whatever. I'm not from a privileged background, but I'm not also from an advantaged background, if you can call it that. So having come across the people that I've come across who have created space for me to thrive and encouraged me to essentially showcase my stardom has been very inspirational for me, and I hope to do that for the next person. So it's important because I know this sounds cliche, but they always say we rise by lifting others, right? And that's been my story as well. So I try to do the same for the next person. Yeah, so that's just kind of the space that I'm in. And in a professional capacity at work specifically, like I mentioned, I do mentor other people or even coach them. It doesn't have to be a formal mentor-mentee relationship. If I see a new person who's joined the organization and there's something I can do to help them, if they've joined the graduate program, I will give them guidance because I've gone through it, right? To say these are the tips for survival, so to speak, and this is what you can do to set yourself apart. And I am also part of this career development committee, which is a subsector of the equity, diversity, and inclusion committee that I refer to, where I just lead the pillar specifically on career development to say, what can we do to create opportunities for African and colored talent to continue to thrive in their careers, essentially, and to be seen. So that's kind of the advocacy work that I'm involved in, which speaks to paying it forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few ways to approach paying it forward or to be an engaged citizen in South Africa. It's one of my fears that we lose a sense of patriotism towards our country and towards helping one another. When I was in the US, it was, even as an exchange student, it was pretty much expected of us to contribute to the community as part of the Mandela Washington program, where we actually had to go and assist at the pantries, which provided food to people that couldn't afford food, and also soup kitchens and a variety of other things. So coming back to South Africa, it felt at times like communities would leave people behind. And I think it differs across communities in South Africa, but it's something that you can do something for your community, and you can do something for your community or for your country in a different way. You don't have to necessarily do the same thing that every single other person is doing. I'll use an example that when I lived in Port Elizabeth, or Quebec, sorry, is that, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, my apologies, is that Sea Rescue in South Africa, which is the entity, the NSRI, National Sea Rescue Institute, they are funded primarily through donations. None of the National Sea Rescue Institute staff are paid for what they do. You do it as a volunteer. So I had been experienced in going on boats in Mozambique when I lived there, and I was quite a strong swimmer. So I thought, you know what, I'll contribute towards the city by joining the National Sea Rescue Institute. And I was there for a few months before I'd moved to Rhodes. But that even is a contribution towards the country, because if somebody is in an emergency off the coast of South Africa, they rely on volunteers to go and save those people and to help those people. So National Sea Rescue Institute is a great way to help your country and to help your community. There's also things, for instance, so I'm just kind of like talking about like quite obscure ways to help in the community as well, which people might not think of, is there's also volunteer firefighters and search and rescue. So you can also join search and rescue in order to actually contribute and help. And in areas like Knysna, Port Elizabeth and surrounding areas, they actually do quite a lot of work. So you'll end up being on call like one weekend per month. That's how it would work with National Sea Rescue, is your team would be on call for a week per month. And then at any given time, the alarm can go off and you'll get a call and you have to be at the port within 30 minutes in order to go and help. Alternatively, if you can't be there in 30 minutes, you might be the crew that stays at the base to do support. So there's other ways to help besides going into a community and doing things. So I'm just highlighting this because I think some people think that there's only the certain ways to help. But then, I mean, beyond that, there is so many places where you can volunteer and help people. I myself, I'm not a religious person, but churches a lot of the time do really good work for communities, and they also use volunteers in order to run things like soup kitchens and to help people. And then at Rhodes, I was the president of the Entrepreneurship Society, 2016, 2017. And one of the things that we did there was to try and really upskill people on and help them kind of like take an idea and move it forward, because of course that can help them to create a business, which can create jobs and uplift the economy as well and uplift the people in the economy. We also did some other work with the Department of Biotechnology, where we engaged with students from science, high school science, in order to mentor them, to tutor them in order to give them a better chance of getting higher marks in science. I mean, they're getting tutored by postgraduate scientists, which can be quite advantageous. It can also not be that advantageous because sometimes scientists are terrible at explaining things. But there's a lot of ways to contribute to your community. And I mean, even something as simple as setting up a pantry, you don't need to go and get a MPO nonprofit license or anything like that. You can do that just on your own. It's really only when you take money in order to help people that you need that MPO registration and stuff. I mean, Palesa, you probably know more about the finance side of this stuff, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of ways to do things that help communities, and they can be done quite simplistically. If you want something that is more engaged, there's sea rescue, there's volunteer firefighters, there is, you know, as much as this is probably something that I don't know if it's still very strong, is police reservists. Is the police still have, I believe, reservists. So you can be a full-time employee somewhere else, and you can still be a reservist in the police to help the police maintain order in the country. So there's a variety of ways that you can really contribute towards the country. I'm not saying you need to be a military reservist. That's a completely different thing. But you can always help in some way or form. And it really just depends what your skill set is, how you can apply your skill set, or what you're interested in. But you can definitely help your community. And I feel like in South Africa, we need to help our communities. We need to support our communities, and that can be done in a variety of ways. So the reason why I spoke about a whole bunch of different ways to do it is because it might inspire people to join alternative routes of supporting their community.
Thank you for your insightful contributions. And once again, thank you for gracing us with your presence. It does go without saying that you have really inspired the individuals that have joined us today in terms of navigating the complexities of the corporate environment and entrepreneurship in South Africa, we have really learned lessons from two influential old Rhodians. We have unfortunately come to an end of the program, and now I'd like to give the platform to Mr. Beile to give us our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mutale. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. To our lovely panelists, thank you for taking time off your very busy schedules to join us for this webinar this evening. I knew as I was putting together the individual briefings that this was going to be an insightful conversation. And indeed, it was very, very insightful. What incredible journeys you've manifested for yourselves. There's a need for us to be reminded of the exciting challenges and opportunities that lie ahead after getting a university degree. Very often, we assume that it will be plain sailing once we get the qualification. Thank you for flying the university flag high. We are very proud of your achievements and are happy to be associated with people of such high caliber. To the SRC, Mutale, Tinashe, and the rest of the council, thank you for leading from the front and for allowing us to collaborate to benefit our students. Our relationship with you will extend well beyond your time at Rhodes University. So this is just the beginning. To our alumni community, we are hoping to resume our physical affinity events this year, and we're looking forward to meeting you in person once again. Look out for our invitations via our social media pages and via our emails from the institution. Sometime during the year, we're going to launch our regional chapters. So if you would like to participate in those structures as a committee member or as a volunteer, do let us know. Our interactive alumni website is gaining traction. And if you have not yet already done so, please join using your Gmail, Facebook, LinkedIn account at rualumniconnect.ru.ac.za. If you'd like to suggest topics or speakers for our next conversations, please email your suggestions to alumni@ru.ac.za. You can use the same email address to update your contact details. To the colleagues in the Division of Communication and Advancement who are behind the concept, the planning, the marketing, everything else that you don't see behind the scenes, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining. This evening was very, very useful. It was very interesting. And I'm sure that there's a lot that the people who attended the webinar took away from this conversation. Once again, thank you very much. Have a good night.